Welcome to the Atlantic Bridge, a podcast about politics viewed from both sides of the pond. My name is Emmett Booth, and I'm here with my co-host, Stefan Sase.
There is a new poll out, a poll that has been reported on CNN and also conducted by CNN, which is quite startling in its change of direction from earlier polls that we have seen through all of August and July and June and May and April and March and basically every other month beside the 1 week after the Republican convention. And it shows Trump leading Clinton 45 to 43%. With a lot of people still aligned to third-party candidates. And this poll is interesting for a number of reasons, and we think it is very much in the common interest to discuss several points about this poll, what it means, if it means anything, and where it really comes from. Because the whole numbers don't tell you the story in itself. I mean, there have been polls in which Trump leads Clinton by 1 or 2%, and as we all know, 3% is in the range of error, and blah, blah, blah. This is everything. We all know that. So what is the really startling thing about this new poll that leads us to open our episode of the Atlantic Bridge with it? It is another poll that was conducted together with this one, in which it was asked, who is the most honest and trustworthy of the candidates? And 50% of people asked this question chose Trump, over 35% choosing Clinton. So Donald Trump, for 15% more than Clinton, is the most honest and trustworthy candidate in this race. And I hope you forgive us if we say this is just mind-bogglingly insane. And we want to make up our episode today with the question of where does this perception come from? Is it real? And if it is not real, and spoiler alert, we don't really think it's real. So where does it come from? How is it created? These are the questions we want to tackle today.
Certainly, well said, and I think there's obviously a number of levels at which we can address this. So I was going to start just with the candidate's affect itself and then kind of move outward to larger issues from there. You know, part of it, I think, is that Trump has developed this reputation, as a lot of politicians and amateur politicians especially do, which is that he tells it like it is. You know, he's a truth teller and he cuts across the, you know, whether it's the political correctness, orthodoxy you think is a problem, or he just doesn't talk like the establishment politicians, whatever, you know, buzzword you want to put in for there. He doesn't talk like a lot of politicians. He has this, you know, bumbling, ordinary guy kind of persona that he plays on. So part of it, I think, again, is just overall affect. That for a lot of people, Trump acts and talks like somebody who tells the truth. It's just it's a stylistic thing. And that particularly works to his advantage when he's up against Hillary because, again, purely in terms of affect, Hillary doesn't have that particular quality. She doesn't, you know, she doesn't seem out of the ordinary, a fresh new voice that's cutting through the normal, you know, the normal channels or the normal rhetorical tricks of politicians. She seems like someone who is exemplifying, in my mind, the best of those usual tricks. So she doesn't have that, just in terms of style, she doesn't have that truth-telling advantage that Trump does. But, you know, a lot of people, a lot of politicians try that I'm just telling it like it is ploy. That obviously doesn't explain the whole of Trump's appeal, and it really doesn't explain it, and this is what I, you know, want to rant about somewhat, how Trump is seen as trustworthy and honest by anybody given his business practices. Whether you're looking at, you know, Trump University, anything is serious from Trump University to Trump Steaks. The man's been, you know, running grifts and cons and refusing to pay people, and there was a story about how horribly the undocumented immigrants in his model agencies were treated pretty recently. You know, there's this long trail of shady, scummy behavior that, for me, nothing, even the stuff I don't like about Hillary, can't really match, and yet not only are they being seen as equal, but Trump actually is gaining an advantage on these issues, and that's pretty baffling to me. Part of it, again, is certainly a stylistic thing. People just don't People just like the Trump bluff talk. But part of it is certainly in how the media has treated the two. So, what is your perception of, broadly speaking, how the media treats Hillary in terms of these issues?
We have an interesting thing going on with regards of how the media treats this whole honesty thing, and I think there is a disconnect going on, because Hillary Clinton is very much treated like the politician she is. And
sure.
she can tell people how often she wants that she's not a natural politician and blah, blah, blah. She is a politician, very professional one. She may not be the best campaigner out there, but she is pretty top politician. So this is how she's treated. Everything she says is turned and looked at from different angles and hit for weak points, and every detail and every facet of her past is investigated and put under double and triple scrutiny. And frankly, this is how it should be. I'm not really taking that much issue with the media's role in regard to Clinton,
Sure.
Looking extra hard at the Clinton Foundation, looking extra hard at every email she ever sent, and really pondering the question whether or not she tried to obfuscate something with the emails on purpose, or whether she just sucks at tech, or whatever there is in between. This is all how it should be. My problem with the media is that they don't apply even a fraction of this to Donald Trump, who, as you just pointed out, has really a lot of stuff going on. And if you are, as a side note, dear listener, if you are interested in a more and better curated version of all this kind of stuff, I really recommend reading Kevin Drum from the Mother Jones. He does a really great job at compiling all this stuff of the shady business practices and putting it against Clinton's record. But that as an aside, there is simply this really disconnect between the two. And the question is, why is this? I don't really buy into any conspiracy theories, like the New York Times wants Donald Trump to win. They pretty much don't.
Sure.
And this is the case for most, I guess, mainstream media. They don't. For them, a Trump presidency is really dangerous. I mean, libel laws and all of that.
Yeah, of course.
So they can really be interested in it. So the question is, why does this disconnect exist in this very pronounced fashion? And one very good theory about this that I read is simply that journalists still do not take Donald Trump seriously. Him being a liar and a phony and a fraud, that's already priced in. That's
already baked in. Sure.
It is like the dog bites man story. Everyone knows Trump lies. Everyone knows Trump is a fraud. So why would you make an article about it? But the question of Hillary's emails, people are unsure about this. So one of the two is guaranteed more clicks and quotes and stuff than the other. This has to be a major point, it is more structural than you can make out individual culprits that sinisterly draw behind the curtains, do their shady stuff.
Yeah, that's perfectly fair. They definitely, with Trump, it's definitely has more of a tabloid feel to it, the stuff you can say about him. He's much more kind of tawdry and blatant, and it doesn't, like you said, there's the Clinton stuff has this sort of classic journalism feel to it, the shady power brokers in the back room, and I could see how that would be more of an appeal if you feel like writing about Trump is getting down in the gutter. On the other hand, I mean, I appreciate what you're saying that, the scrutiny on Hillary only looks as massive as it does because there's so little scrutiny on Trump, but there really is, the way people are reporting on Hillary's quote-unquote scandals is just infuriating. I mean, there's all this, sound and fury about the Clinton Foundation, but most of the stories, when you finally get down to what actually happened, it's about someone tried to get a meeting because they gave money to the Clinton Foundation. Most of the time, they didn't get the meeting, and the huge corruption is supposed to be that they tried, Or like, take the emails. I mean, when the FBI finally came down to it, they found one email that was knowingly sent that shouldn't have been sent, and then there was a few more emails that were retroactively made classified and that had been sent at the time that they didn't know. So again, there's no there to most of these. It's just it's being used to contribute to this overall cloud, this aura around Hillary of being untrustworthy or being corrupt, and that's a pre-existing narrative is the thing. Like, that's been around as pretty much as long as she and Bill have been in the media spotlight. And I guess with the Clintons, you really get into a chicken or the egg thing, because it's like, okay, was there genuinely corruption there, and then the media started hammering home at that, and then it's been a dysfunctional relationship forever? Or is like the Clintons' anti-transparency thing, and Hillary definitely has a problem with transparency, there's no question about that. Or is that a defense mechanism against a media that genuinely is not doing their job right when it comes to these issues? That is again, kind of burying the lead of, okay, there's not actually anything under these stories, but they've got the aura of something shady. It's tough for me to know who has the original sin in that relationship between the Clintons and the media, but they're not. There is definitely this pre-existing narrative of the Clintons being inherently shady, and any relationship they have is shady, that the media is kind of clinging to. And there's, again, like any story in politics, once it starts building, people just add to it. Like, you are incentivized in a variety of ways to write stories that fit a narrative, and for Hillary, that's the corruption narrative. I mean, but again, it's odd for Trump, because, like you say, there is already a pre-existing narrative for Trump too, that he's a liar, and that doesn't care about specifics, and that he's kind of shady and sleazy. So I don't know why there isn't the same zeal in terms of going after his scandals that there isn't for Hillary.
I want to push back the question for a moment as to why the seal for Trump isn't quite there.
Sure.
And to re-emphasize a little bit this existing narrative thing that you mentioned. Because I think this is a key thing to understand media and how media stories are made. Sure. Because those narratives aren't confined to Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump. I mean, they have always existed. And every candidate always is put into a kind of narrative. And those narratives are seldom purely bad or purely good. At some points, they work in favor of a candidate, and at other times, they really don't. Mm-hmm. For example, Hillary Clinton, the narrative goes, she is an extremely wonky person, she's extremely competent, she's also kind of paranoid in her dealing with the press,
right.
And she's a little bit shady, so to sum it up a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
You have pros and you have cons. For example, for Obama, he's also extremely wonky, he's very competent, but he's also arrogant,
Sure, that's a myth, yeah.
This has also hurt him before. And of course, if you have a situation like the email crisis, the pre-existing narrative of Hillary Clinton doesn't help her, because all this wonky and competent stuff works against her. If this would be George W. Bush's email scandal, who had the pre-existing narrative that he is kind of a straight but a little bit dumb, then he just could stand there and say, email, who gets it, right? Everyone would have a good laugh and go away. But Hillary can't do that, because her pre-existing narrative is that she is competent. And she is the wonky person,
Good point.
She cannot fall back on what is likely true, that she simply doesn't get email or any other tag for that matter. Trump could do it easily. If he had an email scandal, he would just say, this was this other guy and I was too busy with my golf course and I didn't notice it, and everyone would say, yeah, the usual bluster, chalk it up and finished. We didn't expect any other thing from Trump anyway. But from Hillary Clinton, the narrative tells you that this runs counter to her own strength, and that makes it a story. I understand this, why it is reported for Hillary and why it isn't reported for Trump and other measures. It all has to do with those narratives either fitting a story
mm-hmm.
or not. And if they don't, it is really, really hard to write about it, because a normal snippet doesn't cut it.
Sure.
I can do a little CNN segment of 30 or 40 seconds in which I tell, new allegations in the email scandal, and new questions have arisen, and then the segment is over. But if I am doing a story that does not confirm to the narrative, or if it's too snuggly in it, like Hillary Clinton has a new healthcare plan for mentally ill people, and everyone thinks, it's Hillary Clinton's plan, so it will most likely be 20,000 pages long, be incredibly complex, and pretty good overall. So
Sure.
This is not a story, because I would need a giant explainer for everyone if I wanted to make it into a story. If, on the other hand, Donald Trump would bring out a plan, let's say a 200-page plan, okay, with like 400 annotations, everyone would power through it and turn and twist every word of it, because this is Trump, right? This can't be good, and this would work to the detriment of Trump. And here we come back to the real failure of the media, because they are simply not holding him to the standard of a presidential candidate. Chris L. Hayes has done a tweet storm today in which he complained that aside from immigration, there isn't any policy position on which you could actually debate Donald Trump. You don't even know, heck, he doesn't even know what he stands for on most issues. And this is a real problem. And this would, in theory, fit the narrative, and you could hit him for it. Same for his tax returns. Why don't they do that? Because I guess they really still don't take him seriously. So maybe it takes new polls like this one to hammer him, at which point most likely he will fall back.
Yeah, that's perfectly fair. I think you're absolutely right about how hard it is to buck a pre-existing narrative and how easy it is to go with it. One of the reasons I'm thinking about how you would do an attack on Trump in terms of his personal corruption or fraud or stuff like Trump University. And I'm thinking about Obama's attacks on Mitt Romney in 2012, and Newt Gingrich's attacks on Mitt Romney, for that matter, about the layoffs and about factory closings and about being a vulture capitalist, as was the phrase. And that, for one of the reasons that narrative took off isn't just because it was true, but because every time Mitt Romney talked, he sounded like that guy. And even beyond the 47% stuff, Mitt Romney just looks and acts like if you were to come up with a caricature of the overly detached CEO, it's Mitt Romney. And so that's a very easy story to get the media to run with. Whereas I guess with Trump, you can only have one story at a time, I guess, or at least that's how they're thinking about it. And the story with Trump is that he's a blustering, popular racist, which he is. But I guess and he's also got this corruption story. I guess you can't. It's hard to run with those at once, and I sympathize because I sympathize not really with the media, but with the Clinton campaign, because if in terms of defining your opponent, you really want to hit one narrative above all else. You don't want to touch on a bunch of different points. You want to stick with this one idea, this one concept of your opponent, and run with it. And with Trump, there's a lot of options to go with, whereas with Romney, it's like he's a crony he's a vulture capitalist. Hit him with that. So that is definitely more difficult on the Clinton count. And Trump is definitely running hard with the narrative that Hillary is corrupt, thus the Crooked Hillary nickname for her. But it's just an aura with Hillary. It's that's the thing. It's just a narrative. If Jill Abramson wrote this article in The Guardian a ways back called "This May Shock You, but Hillary Clinton is Fundamentally Honest." And yeah, she is. If you look at PolitiFact, or if you look at just overall records of people who've changed their positions, or just it's Hillary is at worst normal, and oftentimes she has fewer pants on fire ratings on PolitiFact than Trump or Cruz or Sanders or John Kasich. It really is just an aura. And again, part of that is Hillary's fault, because the one thing I really fault Hillary for is that she's really bad at transparency. Again, the fact that there really doesn't appear to be a there with the email scandal doesn't change the fact that she's handled it as if there were something there. So of course people suspect, because that's how she's acting. And again, part of it I think the media bears a huge part of the blame for that because the way they've been treating the Clintons for a long time, I think, is ridiculous on a number of levels, but that's a whole podcast in and of itself. But so then for me that it's difficult to know who to blame in that scenario, and I guess it doesn't really matter who you blame most, but it's definitely a toxic codependent relationship between Hillary and the media, and unfortunately it doesn't seem likely to stop, and Trump has seized on it pretty hard. I wonder if there's any way she can push back on it. If there's any way she can turn it around on him, like there's any. I mean, I would have to. You think I'm corrupt? Well, look at you, Donald Trump. I don't know if there's any real graceful way to make that pivot. Because think about Karl Rove's whole thing when he was strategizing for George W. Bush. Was you take your opponent's perceived greatest strength and you hammer that and you make that their weakness. That was the thing with John Kerry's biggest strength was he's a decorated military veteran. He knows his way around the military, and Bush and Cheney are a pair of chicken hawks who never actually served. And that was going to be the Democrats' big thing in 2004. That was how they were going to stop being weak on defense and take the terrorism advantage away from Bush. And Rove and Bush's response to that was to gin up the Swift boat controversy, and basically paint Kerry as this effete Frenchman who didn't really seem or act like a military veteran or a strong guy of any kind. And there's Bush on the aircraft carrier with the pumping his fist and stuff. So I'm trying to think if there's a way for Hillary to do that. Is there a way for her to turn that around on Trump? Because that is his strength against her, is that she's crooked Hillary and I'm honest Donald Trump. Is there a way you think she can make that turn, or does she really have to just give this up as baked into the cake?
I don't really think she can turn it, no. This has a lot to do with the pre-existing narrative that I already talked about. She is running basically as the incumbent. Yeah. And there is this old saying, you don't get into the mud with the pigs because you get dirty and the pigs like it. Yeah. And this is the case with Trump. You cannot hit him with that, that doesn't work. It is not like it hasn't been tried.
Sure.
Look at the primaries. Nothing of it ever stuck. I mean, it could be different in a general, of course.
That's what I'm thinking.
But how would Hillary do this? I mean, how would it look? Everyone in Trump would be the first, instantly say, look, the email scandal is getting to her, and now she's doing the Karl Rove thing on me.
Sure.
And so I don't see how this would work. And I want to get into my little statement, so to speak, on the whole Clinton and the media thing and how unfair it is and all of that. I mean, I sympathize with her. I really do. I mean, I'm a partisan for Clinton, obviously, as we both are.
Indeed.
Yes, I think the email thing and the foundation thing, they are totally overblown and yada, yada, yada. Everything is true, but nothing of it really matters. I mean, this is an issue of closing ranks within the Democrats' camp, I guess. So we need those explanations, we need those analysis, just to give ourselves a little bit to hold to, but it won't help her with the general electorate that isn't already more or less on her side. So the thing is, yes, it's unfair, grossly unfair, and yes, both sides have to take blame and all that kind of stuff. But this is just part of the business. It is incredibly ugly, and I could never ever stand for this. I mean, the pressure that the public person Hillary Clinton is under, and any other top politician for that matter, I would buckle under it, I guess.
Sure, me too.
I could never do it. This is really not for me, so take this with a grain of salt, because I'm talking as an outsider here. But this is something that you have just to run with, basically. For example, is it unfair that Barack Obama simply had to stay calm for 8 years and could never get angry because then racist instincts would be awoken of the angry black man?
Sure.
Yes, you bet it's unfair. But he had no other choice. He had to do it. It was the cost of doing business. And do you think that George W. Bush or many other Republicans really love going to church and to going to all those country fairs and eating the fat food and shaking the hands of people in checkered shirts? No, they don't like it. Most likely they hate it, and but that's the cost of doing business. You know, all this stuff of what you have to do to keep up appearances. There was a great comment, I don't know where I read it, about the farm of George W. Bush, because he always was out on that stupid farm in Texas, and he had his cowboy hat on, and he was doing all the manly things. And the second he was not president anymore, they sold the damn farm and moved to suburban Dallas, because that was never who he was. But that was the cost of doing business. And the same is true for Clinton. Yes, it's unfair. Yes, it sucks. But if you want to be president, sorry, that's the price tag that's attached to it. And so, yes, I'm sympathetic. But at the same time, talking about how blown out of proportion all of it is, while true for us at least, who are partisans, it doesn't matter squat. So either she can run along with it, suck it all up, and get elected president, or she can't, in which case the whole she's the most qualified person for the job ever thing might have been overblown as well.
Yeah, that's totally fair. I mean, you're right. I'm just, raging against the dying of the light, basically, with stuff like that. There's no real... And mostly I'm on, I don't bemoan the process that much. The performative identity stuff like Bush's ranch, I get why that exists. And even though it's fake, I get it, because, the people who like that, I'm sure most of the people who like the sight of Bush clearing away brush in Crawford, Texas, know deep down that that's not really what George Bush does on most days, and that's not really what he wants to do. But for them, it's like it's a heuristic, it's an indicator. Like, okay, this is just like a microcosm of who he is inside as a person and what he considers valuable and what he looks for in America. Blah 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 blah. And so that I'm overall fine with that. But it just frustrates me when that narrative is imposed on Hillary, when it's not really there. Because, but like the other narratives we were talking about were things that candidates were affirmatively doing. You have that farm in Texas. You go to the Iowa State Fair. And for Hillary, she seems kind of helpless at this point in terms of this narrative. Like, there's not much she can do to redirect it or even perform otherwise. Like, she's trapped. Like, even when she tries to act authentic, well, she's acting authentic, which isn't the same thing as being authentic. So she seems to be kind of uniquely stuck in this regard, because like there's no heuristic she can use, because like the narrative about her is that she's fake. So any attempt to be real will be seen as further proof that she's fake. So part of me thinks you're right. She should just embrace not the corruption narrative, but and she's doing this, that she's a fundamentally typical politician, and that she's the best of those, and that she seems to be kind of running with that. And I think you're right. I think that is the best chance she has at a narrative. And you're right. As unfair as it is to have that certain narratives imposed on her, it is definitely the cost of doing business, and it's certainly not the worst sin of the media. And I think you're right that the bigger problem is the lack of the same thing on the Trump side. That they are fixated on treating him as a sideshow curiosity instead of a dangerous person. That's a tough balance for the Clintons to draw too. Like I said, it's hard to have two narratives at once. It's very hard to both cast Trump as a buffoon who doesn't know what he's doing and also an evil supervillain. Like, that's hard. Even though they are both true, it's hard to make those mesh because they sound contradictory. So that's tough. Sympathies to Clinton in that regard. She seems to be going with buffoon overall, which is probably smart because she's the competent one. But yeah, it frustrates me that... I guess what frustrates me more, the pure nugget of frustration at the core of my frustration, is that, Clinton is always seen as... The Clintons are seen as this kind of microcosm or synecdoche for a larger systemic problem. Like, not just that they're corrupt, but they represent corruption. That's how Trump talks about them. That's how certainly Bernie Sanders talked about them. That is kind of they're the epitome of the problem. But Trump is too. I mean, Trump's shady business dealings are not unique to him. He learned them from his dad. He learned them from being in the world of Manhattan real estate. If Hillary Clinton is the problem with the public sector, which I don't agree with, but if that's the narrative, Donald Trump is the problem with the private sector. And I wish that too could get blown into a thing like, say, this is the problem with having guys like this run the economy, is that you've overblown, incompetent narcissists who think that because they inherited $300 million, they're business geniuses, and because they're business geniuses, that translates into political smarts. I wish that was an overall. I wish that overall narrative was coalescing around Trump, because I have seen a lot of people, say stuff like, well, of course Trump is racist on this and this and this and terrible on this and this, but he's an outsider and he represents a change to the system and he's going to break things apart, and Hillary's just the status quo, which is ridiculous. I mean, Trump himself has admitted that, I called up the Clintons whenever I needed something. I called up the Bushes whenever I needed something. He's as insider as anybody. He just happens to be a uniquely weird guy in this world. But he's not Bernie Sanders. He's not railing against the system from the outside. And I wish that narrative got more play. But again, I get why it doesn't, one narrative at a time. And the narrative with Trump is that he's a blithering buffoon who doesn't like brown people, which again is totally true and is enough to disqualify him from the presidency. I don't know, man. It's just frustrating to watch that disconnect, like you say. And every election at this point feels like it's going to be a moment of reckoning for the media, but it doesn't really happen, and they keep playing that particular game. We'll see. I mean, do you think they're ever going to start taking Trump more seriously than they are, or is this just the next 2 months is just this? It's a little late in the game.
It's hard to say at the moment, really. We keep coming back to this time and time again, but the debates will really be a watershed moment in one direction or the other, because he can only run so far from the policy issues. And yes, the third debate will be moderated by a Fox News guy, and
Chris
who has
Wallace
already said that he won't stop him lying.
I couldn't, even for Fox, that was unbelievable. It was so brazen that he said, Chris Wallace said, that's not my job. That is exactly your job. Otherwise, we could just have a metronome going back and forth between the two candidates. That's your only thing.
Yes. I mean, the questions could easily be projected on some screen, and you wouldn't need a moderator.
You could just have Twitter. Have people ask on Twitter. We don't need Chris. I mean, there was, during the Obama-Romney debate, there was that great moment in the town hall debate when, I forget who it was, the moderator, but Romney said, Obama hadn't called the Benghazi Act an act of terror, and the moderator stepped in and said, actually, no, he did call it that in his speech, which was great. I want active moderators who are there to, cut through the candidate's BS, and that includes Hillary too. I like it when moderators push back, so sadly I guess we're not going to get that. So it's going to be Hillary's job, basically, to push back on Trump. And the debates are going to be so interesting because they're operating on such different levels, those two politicians, in a way that Obama and Romney really weren't.
I also want to point out that this whole the press needs to get serious on Trump's policy positions. Of course, I hope that this will basically destroy Trump and elect Clinton. Again, I'm a partisan on that. But this is also important from a simple democratic standpoint, because you cannot, in any good conscience, elect the head of the executive for 4 years without knowing the slightest thing about what he's going to do. This is just not healthy in any way, and it would also not be healthy if it was the Democratic contender. For example, think of a moment like if it was Rubio versus Sanders, for example, and the press simply wouldn't take Sanders seriously and only harp on the whole socialism issue, and can a candidate who calls himself a socialist really be elected, and all coverage would be around this and the definition of socialism and all that kind of stuff, and no one would ever really talk about what Bernie Sanders really stands for. I mean, we obviously have an idea because Sanders, in contrast to Trump, talks about it. But the electorate at large would never hear about it because the media wouldn't report it. And this would be, and Sanders would get elected then in that scenario. That would really be a problem because he would then start ruling with stuff that no one ever had the slightest idea he wanted to do.
Sure.
Like public option, free college. Did we ever talk about this in the campaign? And the same is true for Trump. You have no clue what he will do because we never talked about it, really. And this is the responsibility where the media are really failing. I'm also feeling, of course, that they should do everything in their power to stop Trump, but this is me, the partisan, speaking.
Sure.
But the real problem is that they do not do the investigative and analyzing work that is required of them, for which they have a special status within the constitutional system and special protections in place, so no asshole president can use libel laws against them. All that kind of stuff is there for a reason, and that reason is very well filled out with Clinton, but not at all with Trump. And this is kind of a big problem here. And oh boy, this leads us to the conundrum that we are in now, and to make a little pivot,
sure,
to another topic here that is, of course, a little bit related. There has been a new line of attack from the Republicans against the liberal movement at large in regard to Trump, which is that liberals are responsible for creating Trump because they use all those harsh attacks like a racist enabler and class warrior and all that kind of stuff against John McCain and against Bush and against Romney. And I think, of course, that it is quite baloney as an argument, but it is interesting in how they tried to let this gain traction. It shows you a little bit about how the Republican elites see this whole conflict. Obviously, they wouldn't do this if they thought Trump would win, right?
Sure.
This is a method of shedding themselves of responsibility. And this is interesting also in regard to the poll with which we opened this episode. So, what do you think about this whole great theory that liberals created Trump?
It's nonsense. Liberals have been... We've been warning that someone like Trump was coming for a long time. We've been talking like the Republican Party about this for a long time, but it didn't happen until this year. So how are we... we're not to blame for Trump's status because we didn't vote for him. If the argument is we are helping the media not take him seriously. The media didn't take those claims about Romney or McCain especially seriously either, so I'm not seeing really the causal link there. I think the criticism about Romney and McCain were mostly on point from the left, and even if they weren't, again, that doesn't forgive the Republicans for voting for him, and it doesn't forgive the media. The media have their responsibility regardless of what the left does. We could talk about Romney and McCain until we're blue in the face. It doesn't matter. They still have the responsibility to investigate the nominee as is. For me, it's not that Trump's emergence as the nominee doesn't mean that liberals were taken too seriously. It means we weren't taken seriously enough. That we've been pointing out these trends in the Republican Party for a long time, and now they've come to a head, and now we're being told, hey, you shouldn't have pointed out those trends. Now we can't take it seriously. I don't think anyone serious on the left talked about Romney and McCain in these same terms that they're talking about Trump, because they are different politicians. But yeah, there were a lot of bad things to say about Romney and McCain. I don't think there's anything wrong with saying them. Yeah, I'm not fond of that particular theory. But like you say, it is interesting to watch the right scramble in terms of coming up with a post-Trump narrative. I think even though the polls have tightened lately, a lot of the right seems to be writing the potential of Trump's victory off and more focusing on damage control, whether you're talking about down-ballot races or just what the right will do afterwards. And yeah, part of that is acting like Trump is an alien that just happened to their movement from the outside, and blaming liberals for his rise is part of making that happen. But they gotta clean their own house on that count, and they gotta, not just that Trump is there, but that a lot of their voters think him honest and trustworthy, and think him more trustworthy than the leaders of the Republican Party, and think him more trustworthy than the press. That's the other thing. I mean, there's the general reputation of the national media with the voting population, especially the Republican voting population, is in the gutter. So, and again, it's this horrible thing you're caught in, because the classic Fox trick is to work any criticism of the right as a persecution narrative. It's like, the mainstream media hates Republicans, hate the right wing, so anytime they criticize a Republican, that's just that. There's no genuine criticism or actual substance there. So they can filter pretty much any criticism of Trump through that they want. So I'm not sure how if the Republican Party, the leaders, the poobahs of the Republican Party really want to break the hold that Trump has on their voters. I don't know how they do that. I don't know how they convince their voters that they are more trustworthy than Trump. How do you convince Republican voters to listen to any gatekeeper at this point, when you, as the conservative movement, have spent the last quarter century burning all the gatekeepers down? So that's definitely going to be a challenge for them to face. Whereas for Hillary, it's more standard garden variety, paranoid politician stuff, which is it's unfortunate, but it doesn't pose quite the existential challenge that Trump does, especially in terms of libel laws, like you were saying.
I also don't think that it poses an existential threat to Clinton herself. I'm still pretty confident that she will ultimately win.
Me too.
This thing, and I'm also pretty confident that she will win decisively, perhaps not a landslide.
No, more like Obama's victories, not Reagan.
I'm pretty sure she gets over 300.
Oh yeah.
I would be really, really surprised at this point. Of course, if she didn't. But the whole thing about gatekeepers and all that, we talked about this before, right? So
sure.
This is really an interesting question for the future of the GOP and the right in general post-Trump. But right now, what we can see is that party cohesion really doesn't seem to be that big of a problem for the GOP, surprisingly so. Because, they have the Never Trump movement. Of course, they imploded more or less, but
sure.
Except this Evan McMullin guy who runs in Utah. But most people have ultimately fallen behind Trump. Perhaps only lip service, but they did. And if you look at that poll once again, you also have these numbers. 50% of Republicans. 50% of people say Trump is more honest and trustworthy than Clinton, and only 35% say Clinton is more. So where are the rest, the 15% rest, Shouldn't this be more like 50-50 to actually mirror the population in the United States? And, of course, I'm not a poll expert, so it might be that they had a strong Republican tint or anything, but I'm also not in the poll debunking business, so let's not go into this because that's wingnut stuff. So let's, for a moment, assume those numbers hold true. Then what happens here, for me, seems to be that the left repeats within itself this pattern that we can see in the media. The left, and most independents and moderates in the middle as well, seem to take Clinton serious as a politician, and have more nuances in their judgment over Clinton. If you ask them who is more trustworthy and honest, some people may actually have reservations about Clinton and from those overblown stories and all that kind of stuff.
Sure.
So they hold back here. And the 35% seem to be more in line with the Democrat diehards, the real core of the Democratic Party. But the same is true for the Republicans. We have so often talked about the ceiling that Trump has with his 30 or 40%, even within the Republican Party. There is no majority of Trump fans. So how does he get this high number of 50%? And the explanation has to be that pretty much everyone who registers Republican says the Republican candidate, and be it a sack of beans, is more honest and trustworthy than the Democratic candidate, and if they nominated Jesus. This seems to be an issue of polarization that is also at play here, and this is part of a larger trend, again, that we have talked about. We can see it in the media with the right-wing media hellhole of Fox News and Breitbart and Drudge Report and all that kind of stuff. They are incredibly cohesive in their "we are a persecuted minority in our own country in which we should be the majority" thing that we have going on. So this seems to play a big part. And so the interesting question for Clinton is, will the missing 15% come around come election day or not? And this is also this makes the whole campaign for the Clinton camp a dance in a minefield, because she can do so many things wrong, whereas Trump has now proven beyond a doubt that he can pretty much do whatever he likes. So, at least right now.
Sure.
And there are so many mistakes that Clinton could make. For example, attack Trump on his racism, attack Trump on his business record, attack Trump here, attack the GOP in general. And Clinton is very, very careful in her remarks. I mean, the most overt attack has been against the alt-right movement, this one speech.
Which I loved.
And that one was really directed at the Republican elites.
That's a good point. Like, you let this happen, yeah.
Way out. It was deliberately downplayed, basically.
That's true.
It was read as part of the country at a time where no one is watching news. So this was really an insider thing, which is who Clinton is, right?
Yeah.
So, but all else being equal, Clinton is more or less running on a platform of let's all get along, shall we? And else go into this wonky area of very detailed policy proposals, knowing that no one will discuss them with her, you know?
Mm-hmm.
This reinforces the narrative that she once reinforced, you know, I'm basically running for a third tenure for Obama. And that works, kind of. And the question is, will it work good enough?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Partisanship is definitely playing a strong role there, especially negative partisanship, which we've talked about before, where it's not so even much loyalty to your party as distaste or horror for the other party, which is definitely the case for a lot of Republicans regarding the Democrats in general, and the Clintons specifically. You know, they really regard Hillary as not just corrupt, but basically evil. So for them, Trump might just be the lesser of two evils. And in the other direction, I think that, you know, I think it's so ironic that, you know, Trump spent so much work, sometimes genuinely, sometimes not, setting himself apart from the Republican Party, broadly writ. But what might bring him down is just the unpopularity of the party, the negative partisanship attached to the Republican Party, the way Hillary can play on Democratic partisans or just, you know, Sanders fans and their dislike for the Republican Party. And because Trump, you know, other than a few stabs on immigration and trade, has taken pretty standard Republican positions on most issues, at least for this campaign. So I think that would be a tremendous irony if it really for all the sound and fury, if it came out to another 53-47 election like the last couple, because the Democrats have a bigger chunk of the country that don't like the Republicans or have been alienated by them. And just the larger issues still just kind of hover on the surface, but when you get down to the actual mechanics of the votes, it might turn out very similar, which would be quite the anticlimax.
Yeah, absolutely.
But so that pretty much sums up my thoughts on this topic cluster. Anything else from you, my illustrious co-host?
I have one point which I couldn't organically bring in at any point, and it harkens back to what you started with about this whole authenticity thing and, you know, Trump as a truth teller.
Right.
Because this is something that really drives me mad as a political cliche. You know, someone who insults people is always telling the truth, which is bullshit. He is what he does, or she, but mostly it's a he. What he does is reinforcing your stereotypes and insulting other people so you don't have to.
Right.
And this is the great strategy that works for all right-wing populist parties, especially here in Europe. You know, it's always like, oh, they tell it like it is because all foreigners are lazy asses who just collect welfare checks. That's not actually near the truth. It's just a sentiment that you exactly know you can't utter in public.
Right.
So you really like it when somebody else does it for you. And this is also the case with Trump. And here also what is needed is constant repudiation and constant condemnation of this kind of talk, because you need to keep the taboo on bigotry and racism and sexism, and Trump is really trying to, like all other right-wing populists as well, is really trying to tear that taboo down. But I guess this will be a special podcast about political correctness, which we should really do at some point.
Yeah, I'm up for doing that. That sounds great. I think you're absolutely right. Trump is trying to legitimize his rhetoric and to cast that taboo as not something that just decent people do, but as a politically correct affectation of the elites who don't want to say what's really going on in the country. And I don't remember which guy exactly, but it was a a local white nationalist politician, I think in Southern California, who said that, you know, I used to say my piece and people would say that's racist, but now people say, oh, you just sound like Donald Trump. So he's managed to, you know, mainstream and legitimize this approach that really should remain taboo and fringe, and that'll have dangerous consequences long term, I'm sure, unless he really gets annihilated. Either way, really. And yeah, I wish the national media would push harder to maintain that taboo. On the other hand, like I said, there's the problem of their own credibility as gatekeepers for a lot of people, whether justified or not. So, you know, it's so hard, as the Republicans are finding out themselves, it's so hard to find a voice to disparage Trump that people who like Trump will see as credible. Like finding that, you know, that microphone from which to speak is very difficult, and we'll see what they try over the next 2 months. You have been listening to The Atlantic Bridge, a podcast about politics viewed from both sides of the pond, with Emmett Booth and Stefan Sasse. New episodes out every fortnight on Friday. You can find us on Tumblr and YouTube and on our own personal sites at poorquentin.tumblr.com and stefansasse.deliberationdaily.